message it sends to law enforcement is clear. It is that convicted violence against police and sedition against the United States is right now okay in this new Trump administration if it is waged for Trump. And while Trump allies once denied the facts of January 6th because it was so horrific and opposed, you might recall some falsely blamed it on liberal Trump critics, groups like Antifa, because they saw what you see on your screen. They knew how bad it was, how unpalatable it was, and they said, that can't be us, so it must be someone else. We have gone in 4 years from that to the new project you're seeing today, which turns to trying to redeem those crimes as somehow a positive, with homemade videos and other efforts to show these convicts as they exit prison, to some groups welcoming them. Police and law enforcement veterans say these blatant acts against law, which is what they are, U.S. law makes convicts finish their sentence. So Trump is acting against law, and they say acting against order, because these new pardons endanger federal law enforcement, as his fans will view, and do view, federal crimes against, say, Capitol Police or FBI as something that can be immunized, that is okay, that is even sometimes celebrated on parts of the right. Now, let me tell you very clearly. This is a new administration, lawfully elected by the public. This new administration can pursue all kinds of policies that might be very debatable or even, quote, controversial. What's the right amount of immigration or regulation? What's the right size of government? All of that is part of expected debate, and because that side won, they're going to try to pursue their answers to those questions. In a democracy governed by the rule of law, that's supposed to be done through law. But freeing violent criminals and convicted seditionists against the United States has not been part of the legitimate debate, not even recently inside the Republican Party. Republican leaders decried how police officers with riot gear were getting spit on and attacked by MAGA rioters. Those are the outraged words of Republican Marco Rubio, who, along with the party's Senate leader and other Trump allies, like, say, Lindsey Graham, said those words with those kind of very clear condemnations of those later convicted attackers and seditionists. They said that the night of the insurrection.
This failed insurrection only underscores how crucial the task before us is for our republic.
We had police officers, the men and women that we walk by every single day that guard the doors and we say hello to, out there with riot gear getting spit on and attacked.
All I can say is count me out. Enough is enough.
That was 4 years ago this month. If anyone is lying to you or trying to claim that this is a red-blue thing, everyone you just heard from were not only Republican leaders, but people who at the time had supported Donald Trump's attempt to lawfully win that election, which he lost, and many of them had given a lot of comfort to his post-loss efforts. They drew the line there at that violence against police, and you could hear in some of their voices the fear they understandably felt, and don't mishear me, I'm not judging that. Any normal human being would be afraid of those convicted seditionists and attackers you saw chanting for violence or murder of politicians. Today, Marco Rubio works for Donald Trump as he pardons those attackers. He's part of the administration. And we do not need to speculate on his view of the January 6 convicts. He may view his current role as one where he doesn't criticize his boss, but we know his view of those convicts. We know the view of the January 6 convicts held by Trump official Marco Rubio because he already shared it. Freeing these violent attackers, which is one of the first things Donald Trump is doing in office, is so extreme. Again, if you're trying to keep track and you end up hearing from someone that this is just business as usual, or there was a reason for this, or this is a blue-red partisan thing, or the many other assorted defenses people are making, again, our job here is to follow the facts and give them to you. As a factual matter, this thing is so extreme that even after Trump's recent 2024 election victory, his own vice president was ruling out the pardons for the very violent attackers, even apart from the other group. When asked about that, which is, of course, now what you know tonight Donald Trump did. When asked about that, his incoming vice president was ruling out that kind of pardon for a violent attacker.
If you protested peacefully on January the 6th and you've had Merrick Garland's Department of Justice treat you like a gang member, you should be pardoned. If you committed violence on that day, obviously you shouldn't be pardoned.
If you committed violence on that day, obviously you shouldn't be pardoned. Those are the words of the vice president selected by Donald Trump to be a heartbeat from the presidency, who has spent his time supporting everything Donald Trump does and that he might do. And as recently as that interview, then Vice President-elect Vance, now the vice president, was saying what he apparently thought, that obviously the line would be at violence against police. He hadn't caught up to the program. He later walked that back. But again, I'm showing you these facts. He said that on Fox News. So viewers of Fox News with a memory know it was that extreme. It suggests J.D. Vance's recent, unvarnished perhaps, view of at least the bare minimum at that moment. You wouldn't, surely, obviously, as he put it, quote, obviously you wouldn't pardon people convicted of violently attacking the police who were bravely defending the Capitol, which is as much an embodiment of U.S. democracy as you can find, the Capitol, and the people inside the Capitol, which include, at the time, then Senator J.D. Vance, and then Senator Marco Rubio and the others I showed you. Remember, the public overwhelmingly opposes these type of pardons when they've been asked about it. Only 1 in 5, 20% of Americans think it was a good idea. There's a gulf between what Trump is doing and the public, including some of the Republican voters. So today we have Republican politicians know this. They know they've never previously backed pardoning seditionists against the United States. They know they publicly rebuked these attackers after January 6th. They know what you see on your screen. This is opposed by most of the nation, which speaks to the dodging we saw today.
Those who assaulted police officers and then were pardoned by the president.
I haven't seen any. I haven't gone into the detail.
But there are those pardons that exist.
I have to read it.
Can you put forward with some of those pardons for violent offenders? Are you comfortable with that?
I haven't seen the details, but I think a lot of those pardons are definitely well deserved.
Are you comfortable with these pardons for January 6th offenders?
Look, as I said, as I've said before, we're looking forward to the next 4 years, not the last 4.
That is the top Republican leader, Senator Thune. The point here isn't to get in some sort of quick passing cheap shot about his ability to answer the question in that form. The point is, even right now, at the apex of Donald Trump's incoming power, fresh off seeing him yesterday at the inauguration, even the Republican leader does not want to say yes. That's how unpopular this is, because most people don't think that pardoning people who attack police and were convicted by a jury of their peers is a good idea. It's not fair to the police. It's not fair to the victims of those crimes. It's not fair to the history. And it's also not a good idea for public safety. Anybody can reason through that. That's why if you watch campaigns throughout the ages in both parties, when you find violent criminals and people doing violence and crime in different neighborhoods, and it was an issue in this campaign, most voters, well across partisan lines, say, well, yeah, no, if you caught a violent criminal, they should be prosecuted and they should serve their sentence, not the other way around. Not an exception for just, quote, political violence on your side. And so I'm showing you that Senate Majority Leader Thune today doesn't want to say Trump was right or this was a good idea or even it was debatable. He said, I want to talk about anything else, the future. But what's happening right now is the future. This is the new president. This is how he's acted on his first day in office, and it affects the future we are all going to share because we all still share this country. I can tell you there were some Republican lawmakers, not in leadership, who did speak against the pardons today, but the leadership, the prominent voices, did not. One congresswoman even saying she'll invite those convicts back. The people who attacked the Capitol Police, she's saying they'll come back as her guest. When the January 6th attack unfolded, many Trump allies were aghast. Some spoke out in public. I just showed you some of that. Others had a type of access that the vast majority of people don't have. So now take yourself inside that sort of elite, in this case, right-wing elite position. You actually can get to the top of the White House, even in a crisis. And I mean this quite seriously. If you look back, what they did with that access, some of them, was use it to plead with the Trump White House to make the insurrection and the violence stop. Fox host Laura Ingraham privately reached out using her access. This is something that people build up over time if you know people in power. And she texted Trump's chief of staff. She didn't ask for an interview. She wasn't arranging something for the next day. She said, Mark, the president needs to tell the people in the Capitol to go home. Ingram's text only became public later because Fox was taken to court for alleged falsehoods about Trump losing that election. What's she saying today? What's she saying this week? You can witness her reversal, embracing the pardon of the convicts that we know in the moment she wanted to stop because she thought she was trying to do a good thing. And so now her viewers, the White House, anyone can fact check what she actually thought and did to what she says now. But a project embracing election lies may not care much about enduring facts.
What was your highlight of your executive order?
The J6 pardons.
What did he do there?
1,600 pardons for J6ers who were arrested.
Those who breached the Capitol Hill security today, whoever they were criminals.
Yes, they were. They were criminals back when she tried to use whatever influence she had to stop them. They were criminals when she said it on air. In our system, they were criminals when they were convicted of crimes. We all can see what's changed. And to quote one great poet, what's understood doesn't have to be explained. But we have to make sure we all understand what's happening as we go forward together.
We've just learned that senators have received an affidavit containing new allegations against Defense Secretary nominee Pete Hegseth. NBC's Julie Sirkin helped break this story. She joins us now. What more can you tell us?
Well, Chris, this is significant because for the first time, we are hearing on the record of somebody who spoke directly with Samantha Hegseth during the time in which she was married to Pete Hegseth, who shared concerns fearing for her safety. I'm talking about Danielle Hegseth. She's the former sister-in-law to both Samantha and Pete Hegseth. She says in this copy of this affidavit, a redacted version, quote, I have chosen to come forward publicly at significant personal sacrifice because I am deeply concerned by what Hegseth's confirmation would mean for our military and our country. She adds that part of her reason, and this is so significant, Chris, for coming forward is because I have been assured that making this public statement will ensure that certain senators who are still on the fence will vote against Hegseth's confirmation. But for that assurance, I would not subject myself or others referred to in this statement to the public scrutiny this statement is likely to cause. This has been the culmination of days of work from committee staffers on the Armed Services Committee who have been first in touch with somebody with secondhand knowledge of these allegations. Then they were directly in touch with Danielle Hegseth. This was a work in progress to get her to come forward. Reid, who is the top Democrat on the panel that was considering Hegseth's nomination, he actually sent Danielle Hegseth a letter over the weekend that we have obtained asking her to detail any examples of abuse or threatening conduct from Pete Hegseth toward any of his ex-wives. And now we have this result, which is this affidavit, which is currently being viewed by some senators. This has just started to happen after we've obtained a redacted version of this affidavit. And I'll tell you, Chris, that yesterday Hegseth was reported out of the committee on a party line vote, 14 to 13. That vote was swift. It sets up a full Senate vote potentially as early as Thursday. That is significant because once the full Senate votes and approves his nomination, he only needs a simple majority, which means 51 need to vote for him. And of course, there's a 53 threshold of Republicans in the Senate. That means he would be confirmed as Secretary of Defense unless something happens to tank his nomination. In this affidavit, Danielle Hegseth makes a reference of having confirmation that there will be enough senators, meaning at least 4 Republicans that will side with all Democrats to tank Hegseth's nomination. At this point, of course, we don't know if that's going to happen since this is freshly developing. I will also point out we did hear back from Hegseth's attorney. We heard back from his spokesperson as well, and they are denying any of these allegations and saying that Danielle Hegseth is somebody that has not gotten along with Pete Hegseth. So rapid-fire developments here, but this is what we can bring you, Chris.
Well, Julie, just last night, one of our producers on the Hill, Frank Thorpe, spoke with Republican Senator Roger Wicker, asking him about this exactly, and I want to play that for you.
Are you worried that more allegations might come out? I'm not worried, but I certainly wouldn't be surprised. We're going to have those sorts of things. And if anything concrete comes out, certainly our Democrat friends will be free to voice those.
All right, we're going to leave it there.
It's one thing to say Democrat friends, but of course we're also looking at the Republican side. Are there particular Republican senators who you'll be watching closely? And even if you vote for him in the initial round that gets it out of committee, can you change your vote?
Well, his nomination is already reported out of committee, meaning somebody like Joni Ernst, who of course is a combat veteran, a sexual assault survivor, she already voted along with every other Republican on that panel to bring that process out of committee and onto the full Senate floor. So it is now in the hands of the full Senate to consider this. And that statement by Wicker is so important here because yesterday he was talking about whispers of anonymous allegations. Chris, we have been reporting this story for weeks, and we have asked questions to both his office, to the transition, to the attorney for Mr. Hegseth, to Samantha Hegseth herself before knowledge of this affidavit even came to light. And all we heard back from all parties is this notion of anonymous smears, this notion that you heard in Hegseth's confirmation hearing of anonymous names from that Monterey memo accusing him of sexual assault, which he had denied, to any of these new allegations of potential threats or abuse that he may or may not have made to his ex-wives. I will just tell you very clearly here that Hegseth so far is denying all of it. Samantha Hegseth, importantly, telling us today, telling my colleague Courtney Kube today, that she said that she was not physically abused in the marriage. She also signed a divorce document, which was entered into the record by Roger Wicker, the top Republican on the committee during the confirmation hearing, saying that she and Pete Hegseth, both parties, were not victims of domestic abuse. They signed that document. We have not gotten a response, though we have asked why Samantha Hegseth signed that document. Chris.
Okay, I want to take a moment, or more like a few minutes, to talk about how we are going to cover the second Trump administration. And let me repeat, nobody gets a free pass to operate without accountability, not the administration that just ended and not the ones sworn in today. On this show, we have always focused on following the money. It's our thing. Well, the Trump administration is all about business and the mixing of money, power, and politics. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to keep following the money. In his final address as president, Joe Biden left Americans with a very serious word of caution.
An oligarchy is taking shape in America of extreme wealth, power, and influence that literally threatens our entire democracy.
That's a stark warning. An oligarchy, a small group of rich and powerful people with their own self-interests, often corrupt, could take control and run our government. Well, that made me think about who Donald Trump has appointed to his administration, and it's over a dozen billionaires. Then there's the biggest names in the tech world who had the best seats in the House at the inauguration today. Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg. The number 1, 2, and 3 wealthiest people in the whole wide world. And here comes Donald John Trump, the most transactional president in modern history. He is in the White House for the next 4 years. And on many of those guys' top issues, he appears to not have a position or he's malleable. So that means we, all of us, need to pay attention to the decisions that are getting made. And that's what we're going to do. Look at the people making those decisions, why and how they're going to affect all of us. The question, is this White House for sale? Because this time around, it appears to be built to deliver for corporations and the wealthiest. Let's start with his cabinet, Commerce Secretary, the person who will lead the way on a key Trump promise, tariffs, what he calls the most beautiful word in the dictionary. Well, his nominee is Howard Lutnick, who's got no government experience, but he definitely knows business. CEO of the Wall Street investment firm Cantor Fitzgerald, a really big backer of Trump's tariffs plans, and an even bigger supporter of cryptocurrencies, especially the world's most traded one, Tether. Tether is also under investigation by the federal government, but according to the Wall Street Journal, Tether's owner also expects Lutnick will help with any issues the company might face with the government. If Lutnick is confirmed, he said he will step down as CEO and divest his interests so he can meet ethics rules. Well, we'll be watching. But it's not just who he's picked for his cabinet. It's also some key roles in the administration. You know, like the people who oversee Medicare, NASA, Social Security. How about who's going to lead the Securities and Exchange Commission? That's the agency in charge of regulating financial markets. Well, for that one, Trump has nominated a guy named Paul Atkins. He definitely has the credentials. He was a former commissioner for the SEC. When he was there, he showed a pro-business bent, which is okay, but pay closer attention. Because in recent years, he's been a big advocate of, you guessed it, cryptocurrencies. That would be a huge change from the outgoing chair, Gary Gensler, who regularly fought with the industry. Many believed he was downright unfriendly to crypto, simply not open for business. But with Atkins, this is about as far as the pendulum can possibly swing to the other side. And crypto is happy, happy, happy. After Trump made the announcement, Bitcoin surged past 100,000. Donald Trump, no surprise, took credit, posting on social media, "You are welcome." And don't forget this one. Trump now has his own crypto exchange, World Liberty Financial. And just this weekend, in the last 3 days, he and incoming First Lady Melania Trump launched their own meme coin cryptocurrencies, which, you will not be surprised, soared. That is another area we are going to watch. And how about this one? Lobbyists. Donald Trump highly criticized them in the past, saying leaders in Washington should not answer to them. Do you remember? Drain the swamp. Well, after winning, who was the first White House hire? His campaign manager and former lobbyist Susie Wiles to be his chief of staff. During the first Trump administration, the lobbying firm where she worked, Ballard Partners, they brought in more than $70 million in fees. And since her appointment this time around, it has reportedly signed up at least 28 new clients. And one of them is the crypto firm Ripple. Ripple gave $5 million of its cryptocurrency to the Trump inauguration, and they are also fighting a lawsuit from the SEC. There is so much enthusiasm from the crypto world that they hosted their own crypto ball to kick off the inauguration weekend. Now, some might say that's just how D.C. works. President Biden, he had all sorts of lobbyists in his administration, or lobbyists advising him, former ones. But what I am trying to say is what is happening in this administration is massive. It is something we need to focus on. But finally, before we change focus, let us not forget the donors. Why are they there? Especially those huge tech executives I mentioned who are brazenly courting Trump. And boy, is it working. Elon Musk, of course, spent more than $250 million to help him get elected. And there are the $1 million donations for the inauguration from the likes of Amazon and Meta. I mean, Mark Zuckerberg even co-hosted the big reception tonight to celebrate the inauguration. And of course, Zuckerberg has a lot on the line. A possible federal antitrust lawsuit against Facebook could go to trial this year. Plus, he wants the U.S. government to help him fight attempts by foreign governments to regulate Meta. You can be sure we are going to keep a very close eye on what Zuckerberg gets for those donations. And as this second Trump administration takes shape, the American people, all of us, need to realize what exactly we are in for. More and more corporate dollars going into politics, and in return, those corporations getting unprecedented influence in the laws and regulations that favor their interests and maybe not ours. We must pay attention. And that's going to be our goal this year, to help all of us get better and smarter.
I want to bring in NBC's Ryan Riley in Washington. Paola Ramos is in Miami, where she spent Inauguration Day at a J6 pardon watch party. Frank Figliuzzi is former assistant director for counterintelligence at the FBI and an MSNBC senior national security analyst. With me here in studio, Anthony Coley, former senior advisor to Attorney General Merrick Garland. Welcome all. Ryan, help us get our arms around this, because it's a ton of people, including violent offenders, as I said, all being released, I guess, essentially at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, it's really sweeping and full. It's a full, complete sweeping pardon. And I think that that's, really something that I think a lot of Republicans on Capitol Hill are going to have to be grappling with in the next few days, because a few of them put themselves out there and said that, J.D. Vance, for example, is that obviously that pardoning January 6th rioters who committed violent attacks on police officers was not a good idea. And yet that's exactly what happened. You're going to show video after video of these offenders. And I can tell you, well, that person's been pardoned. Everyone who who's been pardoned. The only question is who of these defendants hasn't been charged yet, and who will still be left sitting. Because remember, the online sleuths have identified, more than 200 people who assaulted law enforcement officers that day who were never arrested, and now, almost certainly will not be. They haven't said definitively, but that pardon would theoretically apply to any of these future cases. So it's almost certain that this is the end of the road. This is it. These cases aren't going to be continuing forward, and people who committed really violent offenses against members of law enforcement are being pardoned. In fact, I spoke earlier today with Sergeant Gannell, and he showed me some of the notifications that he was getting of all of these people as they were coming out of prison. He would get this notification. You see them on the screen there. So he got these emails. He also got calls from them and saying, so imagine just like overnight, all of these people who attacked you, who you testified in court against, and then, you went there for their sentencing hearing and told the judge, how awful the attack on you was. And then lo and behold, all in one foul swoop, all of these people are getting out, even though they were sentenced to several years behind bars in most cases. And Sergeant Gannell took a beating more, I think, than most other officers that day. He had one of the worst experiences of the day. There's just so much video of him being assaulted again and again and again and again by January 6 rioters, Chris.
I see the concern on your face, Anthony, and you were nodding as he was speaking. What do you make of this?
So this whole thing, Chris, is quite disturbing. It's also not surprising. Right? Donald Trump told us that he was going to do it, and he's been aligned with these folks for years. When I first realized he was aligned with these individuals, it was during the first presidential debate against Joe Biden. He was asked by a moderator, Donald Trump, if he would condemn the Proud Boys and violent right-wing extremist groups. He declined to do that, and he said, Proud Boys, stand back and stand by. And they did that, Chris. We didn't hear anything more from the Proud Boys through that election. Fast forward to December of that year. Donald Trump tweets out to the world and to these individuals, come to D.C., we'll be wild. And they show up on January 6th with their zip ties, with their tactical vests, with their axes and their bear spray. And they march down to the Capitol and they do exactly what Donald Trump tells them to do. They fight like hell. He told them to fight like hell or they wouldn't have a country to fight for. And that is what they did until Donald Trump told them to stop. And so the message that he is sending with these pardons is that it is okay to commit crimes. So long as you do it in my name, I will have your back. And that's chilling.
Michael Fanone is outside the Manassas, Virginia courthouse right now. Let's listen in.
Really, the only recourse that I have at this point was to seek protective orders, ordering that these individuals stay away from me and my members of my family and do not attempt to contact us.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You called last night. I know you gave your comments about the pardons, but you called it a betrayal. Can you just talk a little bit more about how that felt when that happened?
Yeah, I mean, I chose a profession of law enforcement, and ultimately, my job was to serve the American people, and the American people chose this. The American people elected Donald Trump, knowing full well that he would pardon my attackers, and so it is the ultimate betrayal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, last night after you heard the news, did you decide, basically, when you came today, was this something that you said, okay, this needs to be urgent, I need to get down here today? I guess you mentioned the threats. What were your fears if maybe you delayed this, maybe you didn't have these protective orders right away? What was the fear there?
Well, I mean, there is a timeliness component to applying for a protective order. I know that from my time spent as a police officer. And, a great deal of time has elapsed since January 6, 2021. That being said, I think that the anticipation was that these individuals would serve these lengthy sentences that they were given for the violent assault that they carried out against me. Mm-hmm. And now they're free. Yeah. And so my thoughts are on protecting myself and members of my family, and nothing else right now.
Yeah. And let me go back, if I can, Ryan. Obviously, he's worried for his safety. Is he one of many people who have been vocal about what happened on January 6th? Tell us about his decision to go down there if you know about it.
Yeah, Mike actually texted me and told me this was going to happen, and we sent a crew out there to meet him because, you know, he was expecting a lot of this. I've been talking to Mike for the past several days, and actually I talked with him on the last day, what will now be the last day of any of these January 6 hearings. It was the sixth and final January 6 sentencing hearing. So we actually have some tape from that from Friday of him speaking to me outside the courthouse. If we don't have, I spoke with him outside the courthouse, and he was.
I think we do have it. I think they're just taking a second to cue it up. Let's see. No, we don't have it now. Okay, go ahead. Tell us about your conversation.
Yeah, so I had this conversation with him outside the courthouse, and then I actually led him in afterwards. I spoke with him afterwards, and we interviewed. But one of the moments that I was really just will stick with me for a while is that we were standing outside the courthouse, and Judge Chutkan, who oversaw all of these oversaw January 6 cases and also oversaw Donald Trump's case, was actually coming out of the courthouse as I was speaking.
Okay, wait a minute. I don't know if this is part of the tape we have, but I'd love to see it if we do. So we have that tape queued up now. Can you play it?
After testifying before Congress, I got to see America's true character. I got to know the American people real well, politicians too well. And I just realized that, indifference, cowardice, selfishness are real, that's the real American way.
So this is when you saw Tanya Chutkan?
Yeah, so that's right before she actually walked by, and she walked out with her security detail. And that's something that, not every judge has necessarily a security detail with them all the time, especially, inside the courthouse, accompanying them everywhere. And so she walked out with her security detail. This was in the morning. And then at the end of the day, as I came out of the last January 6th hearing that I'll ever go to, was I ran into Judge Chutkan in the hallway, and we, exchanged pleasantries. And then she actually called and asked, how's Mr. Fanone doing? I think that there's this shared sort of sense of concern for, other individuals, because she's seen people, she's seen officers lay their hearts out. And, it's not only these people that we see on TV all the time, and I think that that's something that really should get through to folks, is there are just average officers who will walk into that courtroom and talk about one of the worst days in their life and testify about how awful this was. And they're not somebody you see on television because they don't want to deal with the threats that, someone like Mike Fanone has to deal with. So, we don't necessarily see those people on TV all the time because they realize that, hey, if I throw myself out there on TV, I'm probably going to get a lot of backlash for it. So people are making these assessments about their personal safety and feeling as though they can't freely speak out because they're worried about these online mobs going after them. And that's really just the situation that we are in here today in America.
Anthony, I've known you for a bit.
Right.
I don't know that I've ever seen you this angry or this emotional as I see you now. What do you say to Michael Fanone? What do you say to the folks who who prosecuted these cases?
So here's my message to Donald Trump. What happened to Back the Blue? What happened to Back the Blue? So while they were talking just now, I went back and I wanted to just refresh my memory. I knew that Michael Fanone had been targeted on January 6th. 5 seconds. He was dragged down the Capitol steps. He was beaten with pipes. He was stunned with a taser. He was sprayed with chemical irritants and threatened with his own body. That's what happened to Michael Fanone. And this president pardoned the folks that did that to him. I think he owes the country an apology, and I think he owes Michael Fanone and the 140 officers who were also on the wrong end of a baton of these January 6 defendants. He owes them an apology, and it's a sad day in American politics.
India's government is prepared to identify, find, and take back all of its citizens living illegally within the United States. Sources familiar tell Bloomberg that 18,000 people have already been identified as part of a proactive step to avoid a trade war down the line. And India is just one of many countries adjusting to the next 4 years of America First. In France, President Emmanuel Macron said in a speech that Trump's return means Europe and NATO need to, quote, wake up and get less dependent on Washington for defense. In Canada, the Calgary Sun, the newspaper there, called Trump's inauguration a taxing situation. In Spain, another newspaper, Ara, published a front-page editorial in English under the title, God Save the World. And in the UK, the Daily Star warned readers to strap in for the Orange Man baby, so help us God. The Star is a tabloid, by the way, in the UK. Joining us now, the New York Times diplomatic correspondent, Michael Crowley. Just want to make sure that everyone knows it's not like the Times of London is saying that on their front page. Michael, it's good to have you.
Thanks.
The world was certainly preparing for this. I know Joe Biden went on a tour saying America is back, but there was anxiety and hesitation among world leaders that his return was temporary and that we could go back to Donald Trump or something like it here. That has now happened. So what is the reaction? What's the most notable reaction you're seeing?
Katie, thanks for having me. And you're right. In fact, I think that there was more of a conviction overseas that Trump was going to return as president than there was in much of the United States, certainly in much of Washington. I think world leaders for years have been preparing for this possibility, to them, in many cases, likelihood, and have been formulating strategies and contingency plans for this. So I think it's not a shock to most world leaders. And, you know, part of what's notable to me is the degree to which, you know, you do see some commentary, particularly editorial commentary, not from governments, saying this is a crisis, Trump is here, everybody panic. And Emmanuel Macron is obviously reacting to the reality of Trump's rhetoric, in which he insists that Europe must do more to carry its own load in its collective defense. Trump believes that America is relied on too much by the Europeans. But in general, I think what you're seeing around the world is a strategy of really flattering Trump and adapting to the idea that you're, you know, as much of the case within the United States, among parts of what used to be called the resistance that is not as vigorous, among business and even some members of Congress, business leaders and members of Congress who say we have to work with this guy. You're seeing foreign leaders basically flatter Trump and say that they're prepared to do business with him because I think they realize that fighting against him hasn't gotten them anywhere. And to some degree, he feeds off of that kind of conflict. And my closing thought on that point is if you look at Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, you know, Ukraine is in a lot of trouble. If President Trump cuts off some or all of American support to Ukraine, they are in deep trouble in their war with Russia. But Zelensky is saying very positive things about his willingness to work with the incoming president. And I think that really captures it.
And interestingly, we heard Donald Trump talk about Vladimir Putin, the Russian president, negatively for the first time, I think, ever. He said he was ruining Russia. That was a surprise.
Katie, that was unusual and surprising. He virtually never, if ever, says anything critical of Vladimir Putin. But, you know, in the full context, I didn't see it as a sort of an indictment of Putin. It might have come out harsher than he meant it, because I think what he was trying to say was that he wants this war to end, and it doesn't make sense for Russia to keep fighting against Ukraine because it's putting such an incredible drain on Russia's economy. You know, tens of thousands of Russians are being killed. So I think he's kind of priming the table for the argument that there needs to be a peace deal between Ukraine and Russia. And of course, that end goal that Trump has set, many analysts argue, is inherently favorable to Russia because Russia currently occupies about 20% of Ukraine. If there's a peace deal anytime soon, Russia's probably going to keep most or all of that land.
All right, Michael Crowley, really good to have you. Thank you very much.